Our gospel reading is from the second chapter of Matthew, a familiar story, although one we've augmented quite a bit with information from extra-biblical sources. For example, the story makes no mention of how many wise men there are. Let us listen for what the Spirit might speak to us today through these words. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay him homage." When King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. They told him, "In Bethlehem of Judea, for so it has been written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. Then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, "Go and search diligently for the child, and when you have found him, bring me word, so that I may also go and pay him homage." When they had heard the king, they set out. And there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. On entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother, and they knelt down and paid him homage. Then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Our family went down to visit relatives after Christmas in South Carolina this year. We always do. We do Christmas at our house and then later travel to the grandparents. But that's all over and done. We made the drive back on Tuesday. There's still remnants of Christmas morn lying around the house, but more and more of it's getting put away. The Christmas tree is getting pretty dried out, and it needs to be pulled out to the curb. When we used to have an artificial tree, we'd sometimes leave it up for most of January, but not that we acted like it was still Christmas. We all knew Christmas was over. Now what? Although many of us attach the story of the wise men to the Christmas story, adding them to our nativity sets, it is actually a post-Christmas story. The shepherds are gone, the angels are gone. They actually never even made an appearance in Matthew's gospel. There's no manger, there's no stable. Mary and Jesus are in a house, and Jesus is no longer a newborn. He's crawling about or maybe walking about the house, getting into things like any toddler does. In his gospel, Matthew doesn't really say much about Jesus' actual birth. It's noted only briefly in a story about the angel telling Joseph to wed the already pregnant Mary. He took her as his wife, but had no marital relations with her until she had borne a son, and he named him Jesus. Jesus has been born and given a name that means he saves. God's anointed is here. Now what? The wise men's story is a now what story. And so it may be a good thing that it has gotten attached to Christmas for most of us. As much as we enjoy the Christmas season, as much as it may touch us, there is a tendency for us to simply bask in its warmth, to drink in its hope and promise without ever asking, now what? But the wise men story won't allow that. It alerts us to decisions that must be made, to powers that do not want God's new day. It warns us of danger. Not that we should be surprised by any of this. Luke's gospel told us of Jesus' birth in the city of David, but no royalty or elites or powerfuls are invited to visit. Only shepherds, widely regarded as crass, uneducated, unreligious ruffians. In our day, we would probably have called them rednecks and laughed that they preferred Hank Williams Jr. to Bach or the theater or symphonies. But they alone are at the manger. In Matthew's gospel, God invites other unexpected guests, sages from the east. God alerts them via a star, but this star must have been nothing like the one on Christmas cards. It couldn't have been because no one notices it but these foreigners. Who knows what it actually was? Perhaps a faint comet. Perhaps a distant supernova that appeared as a star where none had been there before. But whatever its appearance, only these pagan astrologers seem to notice it. And they somehow interpret it as a sign that a king has been born to the Jews. And spurred on by this heavenly sign, they investigate, journeying to Jerusalem, to the capital. No one in Jerusalem has noticed the star. But the report of it and questions about a newborn king gets everybody all upset. I've always been struck by that reaction. We think the birth of a Messiah is good news. We celebrate and sing carols. But all of Jerusalem is frightened and agitated and upset. And Herod begins making plans to get rid of this Messiah. Herod calls him a Messiah. The wise men actually asked for the child born King of the Jews, but no one else will use that title for Jesus again until Pilate does when Jesus is on trial. Jesus is born. Now what? In Matthew's gospel, foreigners of questionable religious backgrounds come to worship Jesus. And insiders, including insiders with impeccable religious credentials, are all upset. And the power in town looks to preserve that power by any means necessary. And the story only gets worse from there, snuffing out any remaining oohs and ahs from Christmas. Perhaps wanting to preserve some of the happy atmosphere of Christmas, the appointed verses for today end with the wise men avoiding Herod and going home by another way. But the story does not end there. Herod flies into a rage. He orders all male children under 2 in Bethlehem killed. Jesus and Mary and Joseph escape, but the carnage is horrible. It's like the Sandy Hook shootings, only it's done by the government. I'll say this for Herod. he recognizes what is at stake. The people of Jerusalem seem to recognize it as too. They know that the birth of a Messiah means much more than carols and candlelight. Messiah is a threat to the status quo. He's a danger to all those in power, religious or otherwise. He's a danger to all those who are comfortable. If Jesus is the new king, then Herod and all those folks in Jerusalem are his subjects, and they are called to obey him and to do his will. They are judged by him. And for Herod, the now what of Christmas means doing whatever it takes to prevent that. And for us, sometimes it seems difficult for us to find the now what of Christmas. The end of Christmas is it's a little like the end of football season. There's not much to do except discuss the old one or wait for the new one. But Matthew insists that Christmas invades our reality, shaking things up and demanding that we make hard choices. Outsiders, pagan foreigners, come and worship and offer Jesus the finest gifts that they have. But others are frightened and threatened by the sound of this kingdom where the last will be first, where grudges must be abandoned, where loving and serving God matters more than money or success. Enemies must be prayed for, and everyone must share what they have with those in need. Many of us want nothing to do with such a kingdom. But despite all that opposes it, God's will moves forward, and the now what of Christmas emerges. T.S. Eliot hints at this in his Journey of the Magi, where one of the sages says, "We return to our places, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation." The now what of Christmas emerges out of this unease with business as usual, a discomfort with a world that is threatened by the ways of King Jesus. Christmas is over, and many of us have or will simply slide back into business as usual, into the patterns and ways of a broken world. But others are ill at ease, and they can no longer live in quite the same manner. And out of this dis-ease, God's will, evidences of Jesus' kingdom are revealed in the faithful acts of individuals and congregations and communities. Christmas is over. Now what? All praise and glory to the one whose birth is celebrated by redneck shepherds and pagan foreigners, and whose coming threatens all the powers that be. Thanks be to God.